Gunfire cracked inside a federal courtroom as Sergeant Victor Kane fired his taser at Commander Maya Cross, a black Navy SEAL, who stood firm to testify against a powerful ring of corrupt cops. Seconds later, he drew a real gun, determined to silence her before the truth could surface. But Maya's silent resolve and the allies moving in the shadows were far stronger than he knew. Would justice strike back before his bullets did? If this gripping, true-to-life clash over power and justice moves you, like and share, so more people can witness what unfolds next. Let's step inside the courtroom and see how it all began. I was there the morning the sky over D.C. went slate gray, and the courthouse glass looked like it had been dipped in smoke. Rain stitched the steps in narrow slants, and thunder rolled somewhere behind the dome like a warning delivered early. People bunched beneath umbrellas, coats pulled tight, all of us funneling toward the security line. I wasn't looking for a story. I was trying to get out of the rain. But the minute Maya Cross climbed the stairs, the air changed. You could see her before you knew her name, straight back, chin level, a plain black blazer that didn't try to impress anybody. She walked like someone who'd been taught to move on, bad ground weight, set eyes awake. 40-ish black, the kind of steady that makes a crowd quiet for reasons it can't explain. When a marshal checked her badge, that's when the whispers kicked in. "That's her," someone said behind me. "The SEAL," another voice, lower, meaner. "Let's see how tough she is without a rifle." Maya didn't glance at any of it. She kept her hands on a leather folder, evidence I'd learn later, and took those steps like she'd taken worse. The lobby swallowed us in. Fluorescents buzzed. The floor had that polished, gone, slick look that makes everyone careful. The metal detectors chirped in a jittery rhythm. And the cops, some of them did that thing you learn to recognize if you've lived here long enough. The half smile, the up and down, the sentence spoken to a buddy, but aimed to land on a stranger. "SEALs are for sandboxes," one of them muttered. "Courts for grown-ups." It didn't look like much, but the way a room tightens is an instrument. If you've got an ear for it, you hear the key change. There was a beat where nothing happened. That's how tension works. It lets you think the elevator's going to stop at your floor after all. Then the doors to the east corridor hissed open, and Sergeant Victor Kane came out like a man who needed the hallway to know his name. Mid-40s, tall enough to think it mattered, jaw set in that permanent shoe. He wasn't hurrying. He was aiming. He reached Maya at the bottleneck by the magnetometers. No warning, no. "Excuse me." He shouldered her hard enough that I heard the folder slap tile. Pages fanned out like white fish. He bent slightly, just enough to look like he might help, then straightened and let a laugh slide out of the side of his mouth. "Hero costumes slipping," he said louder than he needed to. "Trash underneath looks the same." A camera pop answered him. Then another. I looked up and saw lenses where lenses usually aren't, on the mezzanine, tucked near a light stanchion, peeking from a jacket that still had a retail crease across the sleeve. A freelance guy to my left didn't bother hiding. He'd already set his ISO. You don't line up a shot that fast unless someone told you where to stand. Maya knelt. She gathered papers with careful hands, not rushing, not letting him set the clock. Her blazer stretched at the shoulders, and I noticed the small white scar along her wrist, a thin, healed line that didn't explain itself. She rose and met his eyes. No speech, no sermon. The way her face settled told you everything I've carried worse weight. "I know what I brought here today. And I know why you're in my face." Victor leaned closer, the private version of his smile cracking into the public one. "You're not walking in there and smearing good cops on my watch," he said. One of the marshals started toward them, then checked the earpiece like he'd suddenly lost the channel. Another marshal tapped his radio, frown. Static. A coincidence, maybe. Or the opening chord of something we'd all be humming by lunch. I felt the room tilt just a hair, like the building had inhaled and decided to hold it. That's when I saw the guy by the electrical panel. Not a marshal, not courthouse admin. Khaki jacket, lanyard flipped backward, phone cradled low in his palm as his thumb worked. He wasn't filming. He was sending. He lifted his eyes once past the crowd up to the tucked camera on the mezzanine, and then down again. If you want the shape of a conspiracy, you don't look at the villains. You look at the errands. Thunder pressed the windows. Somewhere outside, a siren threaded the traffic. Inside, Victor's voice picked up a rougher edge. "You think that pin makes you holy?" he asked, jerking his chin at the small insignia at Maya's collar. "You think uniform means truth? He chose his volume like a scalpel, enough for half the lobby, not enough for a judge to hear 2 rooms over. This is a courthouse, sweetheart. We cross-examine myths in here. Maya's answer wasn't a quote you'd print on a poster. It was smaller. I'm here to testify, she said. You're here to stop me. She didn't blink when she said it, and even that, the absence of blink, felt like a trained act, the kind of discipline you get from years of being taught that your face is part of your kit. He stepped in close enough that the marshals had to move or admit they weren't. They moved too late, and only by inches. One hand of his, the left, brushed his duty belt like he was smoothing it. The right hovered in the space between taunt and touch. Cameras whined into focus. The mezzanine lens shifted a few degrees and steadied. Careful, someone breathed behind me. I don't know if they meant Maya or Victor or all of us. A woman at my elbow, government badge, clipped to her tote, exhaled and whispered the kind of line mothers hand down when they need their kids to grow spines and keep soft hearts. Justice is slow, she said, not to me exactly, not to anyone, but it needs keepers. The words hung a second, and I watched Maya hear them. Her jaw eased and then settled again, firmer. She took a half step that wasn't retreat and wasn't advance. It was a claim the square of tile under her feet belonged to truth today. Victor noticed. Men like him have instruments too. They can read a room's respect the way sailors read barometers. Something in his face pinched. He turned slightly toward the nearest camera and offered it the front of his badge like a signature. The security line jammed fully now. People stopped pretending they were only trying to get inside dry. We were all witnesses, like it or not. The rain beat a harder time on the glass. If you've ever listened to thunder lean forward, you know the sound. It was that. The storm had decided it didn't need to wait for afternoon. I wish I could tell you there was a moment when this could have been de-escalated, when an older cop with a quiet voice and a stubborn faith in procedure stepped between them and said, "Not today." Maybe there was 5 minutes earlier, back when the first whisper snuck out from the guardrail. But by the time Victor nudged his belt again, and the khaki jacket by the panel glanced down at his phone, that moment had passed. We'd crossed some invisible tape. Maya shifted her folder to her left hand. With the right, she pressed 2 fingers to the edge of her collar, small like a woman brushing rain from her lapel. Later, I'd learned there was a mic there. In the moment, it just looked like composure with a nervous system. "Commander Cross," a marshal said, finally finding the courage to use her name. "Let's move you through." Victor didn't step aside. He smiled, the kind of smile that advertises a fight it thinks it's already won. Somewhere high above us, a lens clicked another notch tighter. And outside, the thunder didn't so much crack as arrive, one long rolling body of sound that filled the hall and rattled the flags on their poles. The storm wasn't on its way. It was here. And whether any of us could admit it yet, so was everything that storm meant. I didn't expect Kane to talk. I expected him to shove again. Instead, he set his heels and went for the crowd. "You know what this is," he said, voice pitched to bounce off the marble. "A soldier trying to drag a battlefield into a courtroom." He nodded at Maya like she was a problem set on a chalkboard. "You spent your years breaking doors and calling it justice. In here we use laws, not muscle." He wanted the line to land. He wanted it to echo. It did. Heads pivoted. Phones rose higher. The mezzanine lens took a breath and leaned in. Maya didn't blink. She drew air in slow, the way divers do, and let it out without moving her shoulders. There's a temperature that comes off a person when they're about to swing. She had the opposite, cool enough to lower a room by 2 degrees. Kane read that as challenge. Most bullies do. Tell them, he pressed, how many times you solved a problem with a trigger pull. Tell them how much law you learned at the end of a rifle. The words were sandpaper meant to rough her up before the cameras wrote the story. She kept her eyes on his, not defiant, not deferential, steady. "I'm here to testify," she said, same as before. It wasn't witty, it was accurate, and that accuracy made him flush. It's strange how calm can be louder than shouting. You could feel his heat rise. To my right, a woman in a navy skirt suit eased closer, a folder hugged to her ribs. I'd seen her on local broadcasts, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Moore. She didn't announce herself. She scanned angles, rail cam, mezzanine, a tiny lens pinned to a lapel that shouldn't have had one. Her mouth tightened, the kind of frown you get when someone moves a chess piece you didn't see coming. She tilted her head toward a deputy marshal and murmured something that sounded like, "Who cleared those?" The marshal shrugged, touched an earbud, got nothing but static for his trouble. Kane saw Rachel clocking the cameras and smiled like a man who believes the edit bay already belongs to him. "Look at this parade," he said, arms opening to include all of us. Whole city lining up to watch a uniform pretend she's above the rules. He stepped half a shoe closer, a voice dipping for her alone, but we all heard it. "You don't run the show here, Commander." "I do." Then he went back up to theater volume. "This is a court. We don't salute myths." The word myth seemed to catch on the fluorescent hum. Maya's hand tightened around her leather folder. For a split second less, the light on her face changed, and I saw somewhere else reflected there. Not this lobby, not this rain. Hot sun hammered metal. A road burned white. A convoy stalled where it shouldn't have. A voice on a radio turned to static and then to nothing. A white man in tan gear shoved her behind a HESCO barrier with a brotherly grin and stepped out to check the axle. The flashbang wasn't a flashbang. The picture snapped away as quickly as it came. She blinked once slow and the courthouse was back. If anger took her, she hid it in her shoes. "Sergeant," she said, and there was more sand in her voice now, "move." It wasn't a plea. It was procedure, spoken plain. He heard the authority in it and laughed. Rachel shifted left, aligning herself over Maya's shoulder like a quiet shield. "Sergeant Kane," she said, calm as a weather report, "step aside or I'll ask the marshal to remove you." She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. The threat was all in the wording, asked the marshal, as if she didn't already know the radios were dead. Kane rolled his jaw, took the measure of the room, and chose escalation. It happened fast and on purpose. His hand snapped to the folder, hooked it from Maya's grip, and yanked. Paper fanned again, not like fish this time, but like birds terrified out of a tree. The slap of pages hitting tile cracked the lobby open. "You don't belong here," he barked, bringing his chest forward, making himself big for the cameras. The sound rang off stone. You could feel it in your teeth. People gasped the way people do when they think they're supposed to. A bailiff shouted, "Hey," with no plan after the word. The mezzanine camera ticked another notch tighter and caught the angle he wanted, Kane upright, the badge framed Maya with papers at her feet. I watched a freelance videographer grin. He knew an A-roll hook when he saw one. Maya went down to one knee again, but something changed in the movement, a tighter coil, a shorter range of motion, like a spring compressing. Rachel dropped to help, fingers, quick eyes scanning for the next hit. "He's staging this," she whispered, and I don't think it was for anyone but herself. Multiple feeds. Her gaze found the khaki jacket by the panel. He was typing faster now, eyes flicking between the mezzanine and his phone, like he was conducting a choir only he could hear. Kane hovered above them, lit by the hiss white of the fluorescence and the colder glass eye above. He wanted the height, wanted the picture of a uniform towering. "Tell the court," he said, dripping contempt, "how many laws you read in a foxhole." He kicked one of the loose pages with the toe of his boot. "Oh, that's right. You learned justice with a boot print." Maya stood. The way she rose didn't advertise muscle. It advertised balance. She took the folder back from Rachel, stacked what she could in 3 efficient motions, and looked Kane in the face. "I learned to keep people alive," she said. A few in the crowd exhaled, like they'd been holding breath for a minute straight. It wasn't applause. It was pressure finding a seam. Kane's nostrils flared. He needed a bigger moment to drown the sentence she'd just set in the room. He sought it with his hands first, then with his mouth. "You see," he twisted toward us, recruiting witnesses. "This is what happens when we let soldiers play lawyer. They think silence is wisdom and obedience is proof." He leaned back toward her. "You walk in there and smear good men, I will put you on that stand and break you in half enough." Rachel snapped and the consonants were knives. She stepped between them fully now, badge out, posture squared. "You're interfering with a federal witness. Back away, Sergeant." It should have been the line that resets the scene. It didn't. The static in the earpieces grew louder, or maybe we were all just noticing it. The room did that thing tense rooms do, shrank. The air got heavy, steps got smaller, time got sticky. A guy in a peacoat coughed and then apologized to no one. A child somewhere asked if they could go to the bathroom, and a mother shushed him with a hand that shook. Kane's answer was to snatch again, this time harder, meaner, like he needed the rip to feel like victory. The folder hit tile with a sound I felt in my ribs. He raised his voice to the exact pitch that makes jurors turn their heads. "She doesn't belong here," he shouted. Not in this court, not in this city. He wanted to cut his shout, her stillness, papers, and chaos. A narrative you can feed to a 6-second clip. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. It was that thin slice where a story can still pick one of two roads. Then Maya did something I'll remember, as long as I remember. This day she bent, gathered exactly one page of photo face down, and slid it into her folder without looking at it. She gave the rest of the papers a quick, almost casual toe to keep them together, then looked past Kane to the security arch and said, "Marshal, please." The marshal who'd said her name earlier met her eyes. You could see the moment he chose. He stepped forward, put 2 fingers on Kane's sleeve, and said in a voice that belongs to fathers who've learned patience the hard way, "That's enough, Sergeant." It wasn't dramatic, it was adult, which is why it rattled Kane more than the shout had. The courthouse went silent in that strange way a room does just before it breaks. Victor Kane's taser clattered to the floor, and in one sharp practice motion, he drew a black steel handgun from his holster. The sound of it clearing leather was small, almost neat, but it sliced through every whisper like a blade. He closed the space between them in 2 quick strides, pressed the muzzle to Maya across his chest, and hissed through clenched teeth, "You're not leaving here alive." Maya didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed to narrow to become pure movement without waste. In the same breath that the threat left his mouth, she pivoted a half step and heaved the oak defense table toward him. The heavy wood scraped across the tile with a deep groan and locked into place between them just as the gun barked. The shot cracked like a firecracker in a tin can. People screamed and ducked. I felt the concussion in my ribs. The bullet sang past Rachel Moore, who had moved instinctively toward Maya. It scored a red line across her shoulder, the fabric of her white blouse blooming scarlet in a heartbeat. She stumbled but stayed upright, eyes wide, hand pressed hard against the wound. The smell of cordite rolled out bitter and metallic. One of the flags in the corner shivered from the pressure wave. Chaos tore through the gallery. Benches toppled. A child wailed. Reporters crouched behind camera tripods and kept filming, because that is what reporters do. The air itself seemed to splinter. Every sound was too sharp, every breath too loud. I ducked behind the railing but couldn't look away. It was as if the room had shrunk to the size of the gun barrel and the table holding it back. Maya stayed low behind the makeshift barricade, her mind already 3 steps ahead. I saw her hand rise casually, too casually for panic, and brush the collar of her jacket. Later we would learn that gesture wasn't nerves. Hidden in the seam was a microtransmitter linked to a secure channel. A silent call for backup that reached farther than any shout could travel. Kane fired again, the report echoing off marble and steel. The bullet chewed a deep chip from the tabletop, spraying splinters across the floor. Sparks jumped from the brass edge of a bench. Yet no marshal rushed in. No alarm blared. The radios on the deputies' belts spat only static. They tapped at their earpieces, faces, blanching eyes darting for orders that wouldn't come. It clicked then, like a lock turning in my head. This wasn't simple chaos. Someone, maybe Kane himself, had prepared the ground. Later investigators would find a palm-sized jammer fixed behind the east security arch, its light still blinking green when they pulled the plug. In that moment, all we knew was that the building's nervous system had gone dark, and the man with the gun knew it. The room held its breath. You could almost hear the clock above the judge's bench counting off single seconds. Maya eased her weight, testing the barricade reading angles. Her breathing stayed slow, the way divers read their own pulse underwater. From the balcony came the relentless shudder of cameras, each frame another slice of history too fast to stop. Kane's face twisted with a kind of desperate triumph. "They can't hear you," he shouted, the words echoing against stone. "No one can save you now." He lunged around the table, bringing the gun in a sharp arc, and fired again. The shot slammed into a marble column, a fist of dust and stone exploding into the air. Through it all, Maya moved with the economy of someone who has mapped every inch of danger. A quick slide left a pivot, a measured crouch, each motion the answer to a drill she'd run 100 times in deserts far from here. She never lost eye contact with him, even as shards of marble fell like rain. From where I crouched, I could see Rachel, still upright, blood wet on her sleeve, whispering into a phone that only returned dead air. Her calm looked unreal, but it held. Another peal of thunder rolled across the roof, shaking the windows until they sang. For a second, the outside storm and the violence inside felt like the same thing, one roar folding into another. And in that long breath before the next shot, every person in that room, judge, clerk, stranger, me, knew the fight had only climbed to its next rung, and that whatever came next would decide whether anyone walked out of that chamber alive. He jerked his arm free, breathing hard now, and for the first time since he hit the lobby, I saw what lived under the performance. Not confidence, but corner. "You make one move in there," he warned, pointing at the courtroom doors, and He didn't finish. A low tremor of thunder rolled through the building, and the emergency lights clicked just once like a blink. It was nothing. It was everything. The hair on my forearms stood. Around me, people went quiet for real, not the stage quiet of a crowd hoping to hear a quote, but the animal quiet that comes right before something breaks open. No one said the word then, but the fuse was lit, and even the people holding the match pretended they couldn't smell the smoke. The moment cracked like dry wood. Victor Kane's hand shot to his belt and came up with a black grip taser, the yellow cartridge flashing under the courthouse lights. He leveled it at Maya Cross and pulled the trigger without a word. A blue spark exploded in midair, bright enough to burn a shape on the inside of your eyelids. The electric pop was sharp and metallic, a sound that made people gasp before they even knew what they'd heard. Maya's body jolted as the current hit shoulders, snapping tight for a split second. But she did not fall. One controlled step back, boots steady on the marble, and she planted herself like she'd trained for this very hallway. The wires quivered between them, humming before she calmly slid them aside with the edge of her blazer. It wasn't bravado, it was discipline, the kind you only learn when failure means death. Kane's voice came next, raw and jagged. "Down on your knees, you low-grade piece of nothing?" Each word cracked like a whip. He wanted to see her fold to prove that power came from voltage and volume. The insult hung in the air, heavy and mean, cutting through the buzz of fluorescent lights. The crowd broke. A chair skidded across the tile metal legs, screeching. Someone screamed. Someone else stumbled toward the exit. Phones leapt high above heads. Cameras stuttered and blinked like a single nervous animal, catching every fragment Maya upright against a rain-dark window. Kane with the weapon extended the thin wires, bright as lightning in a bottle. I could almost see the headline forming: "Armed SEAL attacks police." One tight edit and the truth would be gone. Through the chaos, Maya stayed inside herself. I watched her chest rise, slow and exact, a De Vere's breath under pressure. In that stillness, something distant flickered across her eyes, dust heat a desert sky. A memory, not a fantasy. Afghanistan, maybe. A convoy ambushed, radio gone to static. A sergeant whispering the mantra every SEAL learns: control the breath, control the fight. The courthouse returned around her like a tide pulling back. Kane advanced a half-step, arm locked, face twisted, with something darker than duty. The taser quivered in his grip. His eyes were wide enough to show the whites all around. Whatever line he'd meant to stop at, he'd crossed it. You could feel it in the way the air pressed against your skin. The room itself seemed to tighten. People clutched bags to their chests, shuffled for cover behind benches. A bailiff shouted for calm, but his voice cracked and died in the static of failing radios. Every camera caught everything. Every lens waited for the next flash of violence. And still Maya refused to give him the scene he wanted. The spark wires sagged silent now, but Kane's fury only deepened. His jaw worked like he was grinding stone. You could see the thought hardening behind his eyes. If a taser couldn't bring her down, he'd find something that would. The storm outside rattled the windows again, a deep roll that felt less like weather and more like warning. That's when I knew the real fight hadn't even started. The taser was just the first strike. The way Kane's gaze burned, wild, unbroken, told everyone in that room he was far from finished. And in that charged silence, with thunder crawling along the roof and the smell of ozone hanging in the air, we all understood the next move would be worse. The courthouse went silent in that strange way a room does just before it breaks. Victor Kane's taser clattered to the floor, and in one sharp, practiced motion, he drew a black steel handgun from his holster. The sound of it clearing leather was small, almost neat, but it sliced through every whisper like a blade. He closed the space between them in 2 quick strides, pressed the muzzle to Maya Cross's chest, and hissed through clenched teeth, "You're not leaving here alive." Maya didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed to narrow to become pure movement without waste. In the same breath that the threat left his mouth, she pivoted a half step and heaved the oak defense table toward him. The heavy wood scraped across the tile with a deep groan and locked into place between them just as the gun barked. The shot cracked like a firecracker in a tin can. People screamed and ducked. I felt the concussion in my ribs. The bullet sang past Rachel Moore, who had moved instinctively toward Maya. It scored a red line across her shoulder, the fabric of her white blouse blooming scarlet in a heartbeat. She stumbled, but stayed upright, eyes wide, hand pressed hard against the wound. The smell of cordite rolled out bitter and metallic. One of the flags in the corner shivered from the pressure wave. Chaos tore through the gallery, benches toppled. A child wailed. Reporters crouched behind camera tripods and kept filming because that is what reporters do. The air itself seemed to splinter. Every sound was too sharp, every breath too loud. I ducked behind the railing but couldn't look away. It was as if the room had shrunk to the size of the gun barrel and the table holding it back. Maya stayed low behind the makeshift barricade, her mind already 3 steps ahead. I saw her hand rise casually, too casually for panic, and brush the collar of her jacket. Later we would learn that gesture wasn't nerves. Hidden in the seam was a microtransmitter linked to a secure channel. A silent call for backup that reached farther than any shout could travel. Kane fired again, the report echoing off marble and steel. The bullet chewed a deep chip from the tabletop, spraying splinters across the floor. Sparks jumped from the brass edge of a bench. Yet no marshal rushed in. No alarm blared. The radios on the deputies' belts spat only static. They tapped at their earpieces' faces, blanching eyes darting for orders that wouldn't come. It clicked then, like a lock turning in my head. This wasn't simple chaos. Someone, maybe Kane himself, had prepared the ground. Later investigators would find a palm-sized jammer fixed behind the east security arch, its light still blinking green when they pulled the plug. In that moment, all we knew was that the building's nervous system had gone dark, and the man with the gun knew it. The room held its breath. You could almost hear the clock above the judge's bench counting off single seconds. Maya eased her weight, testing the barricade reading angles. Her breathing stayed slow, the way divers read their own pulse underwater. From the balcony came the relentless shudder of cameras, each frame another slice of history, too fast to stop. Kane's face twisted with a kind of desperate triumph. "They can't hear you," he shouted, the words echoing against stone. "No one can save you now." He lunged around the table, bringing the gun in a sharp arc, and fired again. The shot slammed into a marble column, a fist of dust and stone exploding into the air. Through it all, Maya moved with the economy of someone who has mapped every inch of danger. A quick slide left a pivot, a measured crouch, each motion they answered to a drill she'd run 100 times in deserts far from here. She never lost eye contact with him, even as shards of marble fell like rain. From where I crouched, I could see Rachel, still upright, blood wet on her sleeve, whispering into a phone that only returned dead air. Her calm looked unreal, but it held. Another peal of thunder rolled across the roof, shaking the windows until they sang. For a second, the outside storm and the violence inside felt like the same thing, one roar folding into another. And in that long breath before the next shot, every person in that room, judge, clerk, stranger, me, knew the fight had only climbed to its next rung, and that whatever came next would decide whether anyone walked out of that chamber alive. Rain hammered the courthouse glass as if the storm outside was demanding to be heard. Inside, the sharp smell of gunpowder still hung in the air. The echoes of Victor Kane's gunfire hadn't even faded when a different kind of violence swept in, quieter but faster, a storm of screens and headlines. Within minutes, phones around the gallery began to buzz and light up. I caught a flash on someone's screen: Black Navy SEAL attacks police officer in court. The words multiplied like sparks on dry grass, leaping to every major network and social feed. Clips looped in tight edits that showed Maya Cross mid-movement, but never the shot that came first. It felt rehearsed, as though the headline had been waiting for the sound of that first trigger. Across the aisle, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Moore ignored the blood darkening her sleeve and leaned toward a stranger for a phone. A few swipes told her everything. "This isn't organic," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "Someone pushed this live before the smoke cleared." She scanned the mezzanine, eyes narrowing at a cameraman who suddenly looked more like a plant than a reporter. Somewhere miles away, and yet frighteningly present, Silas Grant moved the pieces. We couldn't see him, but his reach filled the room. 55, a media tycoon with quiet political ambitions, he had been Victor Kane's patron for years. While the courthouse reeled from gunfire, Grant was already directing his production teams to splice shaky footage, drop key audio, and flood every channel with a single narrative the decorated Navy SEAL had turned aggressor. Rachel's jaw set tighter. "This is an operation," she murmured, scrolling through feeds that spiked with unnatural speed. Identical talking points crowded the comments as if written by the same unseen hand. No ordinary viral clip explodes like that without someone controlling the throttle. Through it all, Maya remained still. Her breathing was slow, deliberate, the kind of control you learn when panic kills. But I could sense the calculation behind her calm. Speak now and every word might be twisted into the next headline. Stay silent and the lie might harden into fact before the truth could surface. The choice sat heavy in the charged air, a razor balanced on both edges. Then a soft chime cut the silence. Rachel's phone slick with rain, and blood lit up with a string of encrypted symbols. She held it close and whispered just loud enough for a few of us to hear, "SEAL team inbound." "Hold position." For the first time since the chaos began, a glint of relief crossed her face. Hope, thin but steady, threaded through the tension. Outside, the city was already answering the false story. Through the tall windows, we could see the crowd thickening across Constitution Avenue, umbrellas snapping in the wind. A chant rose with the storm's rhythm, met by the bark of police loudspeakers. People didn't yet know the full truth, only the headline Silas Grant had planted, but they were choosing sides anyway. The courthouse trembled with more than thunder now. Every phone pulsed with half-truths. Every lens waited for the next image to feed the machine. And there stood Maya, motionless, eyes fixed past the chaos, as if she could already see the move that would reclaim the story. In that suspended moment, lies spreading like wildfire, encrypted rescue on its way. Rain drumming a relentless beat, we all understood that the battle for justice had shifted. The fight was no longer just about bullets in a courtroom. It was about who would own the truth when the storm finally broke. I've seen people go quiet in a crisis, but what happened to Maya wasn't quiet. It was a narrowing, like the world trimmed itself down to the inches between her breath and the choice in front of her. The headlines were lying. The radios were dead. The storm pressed its forehead to the glass. And still she stood there, centered in the wreckage, as if waiting for a signal that hadn't arrived yet, or maybe one only she could hear. Her eyes shifted not to Kane or the cameras, but to the middle distance, past the benches, past the doors. I've watched combat vets do this before the body stays in the room, but something inside steps out into a place that explains what comes next. Later, she would tell a committee the memory was a convoy road north of Lashkar Gah. In the moment, all I saw was the desert rise behind her pupils like heat. Sand. Heat like a bell. A road that shimmered and lied. The column had stalled where it shouldn't have. A truck's axle gone stubborn, radios. Coughing static that wasn't supposed to be there. She had been younger, a little less scarred, but standing the same way, weight-set eyes awake, when the first blast lifted air and ground into one. That trick explosions do, where they make silence louder than sound that had happened. Dust-filled mouths. A gunner climbed, coughed grit, tried to joke. And then the second blast, the real one, the one meant for the rescue. She told me later she learned more about time in that minute than any clock could teach. There was a man with her that day, Staff Sergeant Eli Ward, Georgia, drawl smile that didn't borrow from tomorrow. He'd grabbed her plate carrier at the last second and shoved her behind a HESCO barrier with a force that turned duty into instinct. "Don't ever let evil win because we were quiet," he'd said, half a laugh still stuck to his throat, like he believed courage was contagious and all he had to do was breathe on you. She'd started to answer, she never told me what the words were, when Ward stepped out to pull a driver from a door that didn't want to open. The round that found him came from nowhere and everywhere at once. He dropped as if someone had snipped a string, and when Maya reached him, the back of her glove came away red. There are things you don't say about the minutes that follow. What matters is what he said once with breath that scraped bone. "Don't let them teach you to shut up." It sounded simple. It wasn't. It was a sentence she'd been carrying in her pocket ever since, like a folded note you don't show people, because you don't want to explain why your hands shake when you open it. The courthouse reassembled around her. Thunder walked along the roof. The flag over the bench barely stirred. Kane's chest heaved 2 beats faster than the room. Cameras watched as if their watching could change anything. I could almost hear the words forming in Maya's head, the way you can read lips from across a diner window. If justice means I swallow lies to keep the temperature down, then I've already betrayed the oath and the dead who kept me standing to take it. She didn't speak it. She let the thought settle like a stone on the bottom of a river, heavy enough that the current had to go around it. Rachel Moore edged closer, her face pale but set, one hand pressed against her shoulder, where the bullet had grazed her. She looked at Maya the way a conductor looks at a soloist right before the dangerous passage, no fear, just a knowledge of the notes. "Maya," she said, and her voice took the shortest, truest path between 2 points. "This country needs the truth you're carrying, not your story, not your defense. The truth. There are differences that matter." Maya didn't nod. She didn't have to. She looked down at her left wrist at a watch face so ordinary it was almost invisible. For a second, her thumb hovered above the crown, and I felt the entire room balance on that tiny piece of metal. Press it, and she called in a thing that would be hard to take back. Leave it, and the lie outside would harden like poured concrete. She glanced once at the mezzanine camera, almost like she wanted it to see what choice looks like, and then she pressed. No beep, no dramatic light. Just a click you couldn't hear and a signal you couldn't see. Somewhere in a windowless room, a line woke. Somewhere in a van 2 blocks away, a green dot steadied. Somewhere under our feet, something that had been waiting stopped waiting. It's strange how sound behaves after a decision. At first, nothing changed. The gallery still held its breath. The marshals still tapped radios that wouldn't answer. Rain kept working the glass in even strokes like a drummer warming his wrists. Then, buried under the thunder, something new arrived, low and steady, a thrum that didn't belong to weather. You don't mistake rotor wash once you've heard it. It doesn't shout, it insists. Another sound followed, the long rising keen of distant sirens braided into a single line by the narrow canyons of the avenues. People looked up the way people do when they sense an idea turning into an event. No one spoke. Even Kane's face twitched toward the window as if his body wanted a confirmation his mouth wouldn't ask for. Maya's shoulders loosened by a fraction, the first surrender she'd allowed all day, not to fear but to purpose. She exhaled, and you could see the breath leave measured owned. The room answered by going stiller, which I wouldn't have thought possible. Phones went quiet. Fingers stilled over screens. Rachel lowered her hand from her wound and let it hang, as if refusing to give the cameras more blood than they'd already taken. I thought then of Ward's sentence, the one about silence, and realized I'd misunderstood it for years. He hadn't meant always talk. He'd meant don't let them train you to confuse quiet with consent. What Maya did in that moment wasn't noise. It was the opposite. It was a choice that made the world quieter, because people knew what to do. The rotors grew closer, shouldering rain aside. The sirens slid up a register, then steadied like a choir finding its note. Somewhere a door slammed. Somewhere boots found marble. The courthouse felt suddenly like the inside of a lung holding air. And then nothing. No rush, no smash. Just that suspended second on a high wire where the trick hasn't started, and yet you can already feel gravity arguing with will. A woman near me put her palm to her throat as if to keep her pulse from escaping. A reporter, one of the honest ones, tucked his phone away and wiped his lens, suddenly reverent. Even the cameras seemed to slow their little red tally lights, breathing, waiting. Maya didn't move. Her eyes were steady, not on Kane, not on the mezzanine, but somewhere only she could see, drawn by the same compass that had turned her thumb toward the watch. Rachel shifted to share the line of sight, as if seeing it might make it real. The bench creaked. The flag barely stirred. Thunder recited the last line of a speech it had given all day. I've heard people call moments like this the calm before the storm. They're wrong. This was the storm, learning its name. And when you know a thing's name, you can call it. You can make it answer. I've watched people freeze in danger, and I've watched them explode. What Maya did was neither. The room kept buzzing with lies from the outside world. Radios hissed with useless static, and rain hammered the windows like a jury that wanted in. Yet she stood there, still contained, like a fuse made to burn slow until the exact second it mattered. Her eyes went unfocused for a breath, and I knew she'd left the room without moving an inch. Combat vets do that. They step into a memory that explains what to do next. Later on paper, she would name the road north of Lashkar Gah. In the moment I saw it rise behind her like heat, a white ribbon of asphalt trembling under noon sun, the smell of diesel and dust, a convoy stalled, where it never should have stopped. A first blast that rips sound out of the world, then the second blast, the one that waits for the rescuers. She'd told nobody this part until years later, how Staff Sergeant Eli Ward, the kind of man who smiled with tomorrow in his pocket, grabbed her plate carrier and threw her behind a HESCO barrier. How he said, half laughing, "Don't ever let evil win," because we were quiet. How he turned and ran toward a stuck driver like courage was a reflex, not a choice. How the round that took him felt like the sky itself had decided it was done being blue. There are details you don't repeat. What matters is the sentence he left her with. She'd been carrying it ever since, folded small in her chest, the ink refusing to fade. The courthouse slipped back into focus. Victor Kane still heaved for airgun, low and hungry. The mezzanine camera held its breath. The flag over the bench barely stirred. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed, then nothing. The whole place felt like it had reached the top of a long inhale and forgot how to let go. I could hear the words assemble in her mind as if she spoke them without sound. If justice is silence in the face of a lie, then I've already betrayed my oath and the dead who kept me standing long enough to swear it. She didn't look angry. She looked decided. Rachel Moore eased closer, face pale, sleeve dark with blood where a bullet had grazed her. She didn't waste courage on speeches. She picked the smallest target and hit it true. "Maya," she said, steady as a level line, "this country needs the truth you brought here. Not your alibi. Not your reputation. The truth." Maya blinked once slow. Her gaze dropped to her wristwatch, plain, black, the kind you buy to keep time, not make statements. Her thumb hovered over the crown. You could feel the entire room pivot on that tiny piece of metal. Press it, and she'd call something she couldn't easily take back. Leave it, and the lie outside would harden into a monument before lunch. She glanced up at the mezzanine lens just for a heartbeat, like she wanted the camera to record what a choice looks like, and pressed. No hero beep, no movie glow, just the silent handshake of a signal passing through walls. Somewhere in a windowless room, a green light steadied. Somewhere in a van, a map zoomed. Somewhere on a rooftop, a hand lifted to an earpiece and said, "Copy." Sound changed next, but quietly. At first it was only rain and breath in the faintest tremor in the glass. Then a low thrum threaded the thunder rotors, far yet certain. Sirens braided themselves out of downtown, rising together until the city itself seemed to find a single note. A marshal's radio spat static, then coughed half a syllable and died again. People traded looks they didn't quite mean to share. Even Kane's eyes slid toward the high windows as if his body knew before his pride would admit it. Maya's shoulders loosened by a fraction, the first softness she'd allowed all day. She exhaled, controlled, and measured like a diver surfacing into air she knew would be there. The gallery followed without thinking. Phones stopped climbing. Whispers fell away. Even the cameras seemed to blink slower, their red tally lights pulsing like steady hearts. I thought about Ward's line, then the one about silence, and realized it didn't mean always speak. It meant never confuse quiet with consent. What Maya did wasn't noise. It was command. She'd chosen a kind of stillness that makes other people know what to do. The rotors grew nearer, shouldering rain aside, until the storm's voice had to share the room. The sirens hit their peak and held. Somewhere down the corridor, boots found marble with that heavy, certain rhythm you recognize even if you've never worn a uniform. The building felt suddenly like a lung between two breaths. Kane tried to reclaim the moment. He lifted the gun an inch, too jaw-grinding. His mouth formed a word he never fully said. It didn't matter. The current had shifted. He was noise now. She was signal. Rachel's hand dropped from her wound. Her eyes found Maya's and asked a simple question that didn't need language. "Are we doing this?" Maya answered with a look that carried a whole doctrine. "We're telling the truth, and we're not asking permission." A single helicopter beat crossed the roofline, closer, heavier, followed by the distant whoop of an EMS unit threading traffic. Someone in the gallery murmured a prayer. Someone else whispered a name. A reporter I trusted wiped his lens and lowered his phone like what was coming deserved glass over glass, eye over screen. And then we got the quiet no one expects. Not calm, the air still vibrated, but a held string tight as it can go without snapping. That's the space where meaning lands. You could feel the room open just enough for it. Maya didn't speak. She didn't need to. In the space between her breath and the drum of the rotors, you could hear the vow take shape. Ward's words remade for a different battlefield. We will not let evil win because we were quiet. She shifted her stance only an inch, but it read like a chapter and squared herself to the doors. Outside, the chant on a Constitution Avenue rose and dimmed with the wind, an answer searching for its question. Inside, the judge's bench loomed like a shoreline we hadn't reached yet. The flag lifted, fell, and lifted again. People call this the calm before the storm. They're wrong. This was the storm naming itself. And once a thing knows its name, you can call it to account. You can make it answer. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath when the next blow landed. Not from Kane's weapon, but from a screen. A sudden glow filled the monitors mounted along the gallery wall. Without warning, every feed shifted to the same image: Silas Grant, silver-haired and surgically confident, sitting behind a polished mahogany desk. His voice, smooth and cold, cut through the room. "Commander Cross," he said, eyes like glass under studio lights. "No matter what stunt you attempt today, the public already belongs to me. The story is mine." The words dropped like iron. For a heartbeat, the chamber went even quieter, as if the storm outside had paused to listen. Maya didn't flinch. She reached into her leather folder and drew out a small black drive, one she had guarded since dawn. "Then let's give them the real story," she said, and slid it across to the court technician. A single command lit the main display behind the bench. What followed wasn't rumor, it was proof. Crystal clear audio poured through the speakers, Silas's own voice directing editors to cut. "Here lose the taser flash, make her strike first." Then another clip ordering payment to the freelancers who had been waiting in perfect positions when Kane attacked. The dates and times were stamped like a trail of fingerprints. Outside, the reaction was instant. Through the tall windows, I saw the crowd surge as if the evidence itself had struck them. The chant began small, justice for Maya, and then rolled like a wave through Constitution Avenue until it shook the glass. Car horns joined, not in anger, but in rhythm. The storm above seemed to lend its percussion. Rachel Moore stepped forward, pale from the bullet graze, but steady. "For the record," she said, voice carrying past the rain and the cameras, "these recordings are only the beginning." She held up a second folder, sealed evidence gathered over years of quiet work, detailing a chain of police violence Silas Grant had bankrolled and buried, from doctored arrest videos to payments for silence. Each page projected behind her like a door kicked open. Then the twist no one predicted arrived. From the back of the gallery came the quiet buzz of an incoming notification. One of Silas's own senior aides, his most trusted lieutenant, had posted the entire uncut footage of the courtroom assault to a global feed. I remembered the khaki-jacketed man near the panel in the first minutes of chaos. That silent observer had been more than a bystander. He had been waiting for this precise moment to turn on his employer. The new video raced across the world in seconds. Networks that had swallowed Silas's first edit now ran the raw sequence, Kane drawing the taser, the first spark, the pistol shot that wounded Rachel. No cuts, no spin, only fact. On the screen, Silas reappeared, but the composure was gone. He blinked hard, leaned forward as if the camera might obey him by force. "This is doctored," he stammered, but the denial was already too late. Every major outlet was streaming the real feed side by side with his earlier broadcasts. Hashtags flipped in real time. Justice for Maya overtook every trend his team had purchased. The sound in the gallery became its own weather gasps. Cheers, a low-rising murmur that was half relief and half fury. Outside, the crowd's chant thickened until the marble itself seemed to vibrate. A marshal near me whispered, "He just lost the country," and it didn't sound like exaggeration. Rachel didn't gloat. She simply turned to the judge and said, "The prosecution moves to enter these exhibits as evidence of criminal conspiracy and obstruction of justice." Her words landed like the final nail in a long, careful build. On the giant monitor, Silas sat, frozen eyes darting, as if hunting for an exit that no longer existed. The camera, merciless in its clarity, caught every tremor of his jaw. Behind him, aides blurred in motion, phones ringing, screens flashing red. Power that had once seemed untouchable was dissolving in front of millions of live viewers. That was the mini-climax everyone in the chamber felt in their bones. A man who believed he owned the truth watched his empire collapse in real time, undone by his own voice, betrayed by a lieutenant he never thought to fear, and exposed by the quiet precision of the woman he'd tried to destroy. The storm outside roared its approval, rattling every pane of glass. Inside, no one moved for a long moment. It was as if we all understood we had just seen something rare, not only a conspiracy uncovered, but a myth of control breaking apart under the weight of real evidence. And at the center of it, Maya Cross stood exactly where she had, from the beginning, steady, silent, unshaken, while the man who boasted he owned the narrative disappeared beneath the sound of a world that finally knew the truth. The gavel struck 3 times sharp as thunder. Judge Barrett leaned forward, voice steady and final. Silas Grant is hereby ordered into federal custody for conspiracy, media manipulation, and inciting violence in this courtroom. Relief swept the chamber until a sudden scrape of metal cut through the quiet. Victor Kane, cuffed but not broken, twisted free just enough to pull a small pistol from inside his boot. Rage blazed in his eyes as he lunged toward Commander Maya Cross. "You don't get to win," he shouted. 2 U.S. Marshals reacted instantly. Shots cracked like lightning under a low ceiling. Kane collapsed before his second step, the pistol clattering across the marble floor. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Maya stood in the center of the wrecked courtroom, glass shards glittering around her, breathing steady. She closed her eyes for a moment of prayer, not for revenge, but for peace and for the wounded on all sides. The doors opened, and 3 Navy SEAL teammates entered, their boots striking in perfect rhythm. They paused before her and offered a crisp salute, an unspoken tribute to courage and steadfast truth. Rachel Moore approached, shoulder bandaged, and clasped Maya's hand. "We'll finish this," she vowed. "Every cover-up, every name will see it through." Outside, the crowd erupted as major networks began broadcasting the uncut footage and verified audio. The false narrative collapsed within hours. What had begun as a day of chaos now turned into a national reckoning. Through it all, Maya remained composed, the quiet center of a storm finally yielding to justice. Morning broke softly over Washington, sunlight piercing the cracked courthouse windows like a quiet verdict. The storm had passed, leaving a cool clarity that wrapped the room where chaos had reigned only hours before. Commander Maya Cross stepped onto the courthouse steps, black coat over her shoulders, face calm and steady. Before her, a sea of citizens and cameras waited. When the noise settled, her voice rose, measured, deep and warm. "Justice isn't a single victory," she said. "It's the work of all of us every day to keep truth alive, so every child can grow up with dignity and equal rights." Her words reached beyond the microphones. Faces lifted. Even those in the back fell silent, absorbing the promise of a different future. Maya's eyes lingered on a group of children pressed against the barricades, black, white, and brown, watching with something close to wonder. Beside her, Rachel Moore stepped forward, shoulders still bandaged but eyes sharp. "The Department of Justice will open a full federal investigation," she announced. "Every name and cover-up exposed today will be brought into the light." Applause rose like a slow tide, not loud but certain, carrying the weight of change. Just as the crowd began to disperse, Maya felt a subtle vibration in her pocket. A single text appeared on her phone. "The fight has just begun. No name, no number. Only a quiet warning." She read it once, then slipped the phone away, her expression unreadable. The sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the marble steps. People lingered, unwilling to break the spell of a morning that felt like history. Some hugged strangers, others simply stood, eyes turned toward the light. Maya remained at the top of the steps, framed by the rising sun. She wasn't posing for cameras. She was looking toward the horizon, knowing this victory was only the first step. Justice had spoken today, but the message on her phone reminded her and all of us that the work was far from over. It wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning wrapped in dawn, a quiet promise that the pursuit of truth will rise again tomorrow. Before we close today's story, let's take a moment to breathe in what it really means. Maya's courage reminds us that justice is more than a courtroom verdict. It's the quiet strength to stand firm when the truth is under attack, and the hope that tomorrow can be fairer than today. Her journey speaks to dignity, equality, and the belief that every voice can matter, even when the odds feel impossible. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends and family, and hit the subscribe button to follow more powerful stories here on Mr. Max Stories. Your support is the heartbeat of this channel. Every like, share, and new subscriber gives our creative team the inspiration to keep bringing you meaningful, high-quality storytelling. Thank you for being part of the Mr. Max Stories family, where courage, truth, and hope continue to shine in every tale we tell.